Hello and welcome to Hurt Less, Live More, the show where we really feel into some of the pains that we all suffer through life and learn how to work our way through them. The idea being to face up to them, to feel them, and then get through the whole thing. I'm JJ, the practical alchemist, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Goulston, as ever, and a wonderful guest this week. That is Kristel Bauer. And Mark, we're very excited that Kristel's on the show today, aren't we?
Yes, we are. You know, I've been reading up on her, watching her TED Talks, and she's a force of nature and a force of nurture, you know, which is my favorite combination. And she has a site called Live Greatly. She has a top podcast. In 2021, she was in a list of the top social influencers. She was number one. That's pretty amazing. And we're going to hear about her journey to live greatly. She's focuses also on integrative psychiatry. I'd like to learn more from that since I'm a psychiatrist, and most people say you need to get more integrated. They're just referring to my being a tad wacky. And also, she's an integrative medicine fellow. She speaks all over the place, and she joins us from Chicago.
Oh, was that a good Chicago accent there?
Chicago, the Windy City. No, that's my Boston
perfect.
Accent.
I was going to say, it didn't sound particularly Chicago to me. But anyway, what do I know?
Well, thank you both for having me. Thank you, JJ. Thank you, Mark. And thank you for the wonderful introduction. Super excited to be here with you today.
Oh, you're very welcome. Mark, you want to get into this integrative psychiatry. I know you.
Let's hear her journey. And again, before we started, what we mentioned to Kristel is that this is Hurt Less, Live More. And so we don't want to depress her, but part of our bias is that a lot of people need to ease their hurt before they take action. And it's easy to sort of pump them up. But if the hurt is overwhelming, often when they leave being pumped up, how do you get them to take action and follow? Something I will tell you, Kristel, that you don't know about me. I was a suicide prevention focused psychiatrist, and none of my patients died in 35 years from suicide. And I think what helped is causing them to feel felt. Because when they felt, and they felt less alone in the dark night of the soul, they started crying with relief because all they ever felt was the alone there. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's what helped. And I wouldn't rush them into treatment. I wouldn't throw things at them because most of them had many things thrown at them and it didn't really work. So it was kind of going into wherever the core of their pain was. And they looked at me like, why would you want to be here next to me? I said, it looked like you shouldn't be alone through this.
Wow. Well, Mark, that is incredible work. I mean, it takes a really unique person to do something like that. So I'm just very, very impressed and by all that you've done. And that's just like I said, it takes a really unique, incredible person to be able to do that.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. But on to you, Kristel, and your journey, and tell us a little bit about how that started out and how it landed you in Live Greatly and integrative psychiatry and integrative medicine.
Right. So I always knew that I wanted to try and get into a field where I helped people. And that was from a younger age. I just naturally wanted to ease other people's pain. I wanted to try and, I guess, I don't know if you call it like a fixer. Like I wanted to fix things. I wanted to make things better. I wanted to see people happy. And so I knew going into college that, all right, I'm going to do something in that arena. Thought healthcare was probably a good field to be able to give back and use some of those talents. And I thought maybe medical school. And then I talked with some MDs and they're like, well, maybe you should think about this new PA thing, this physician assistant thing, which was really popping up around the time I was in college. So I'm like, what, that sounds good. I'm going to go down that road. So I became a physician assistant, got my master's, practiced in different areas of medicine. And then I was actually home with our kids for 6 years, got pregnant, decided I wanted to do the stay-at-home mom thing. So I was home for quite a while. And then what ended up happening was my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And that was a huge shock. She was healthy, not a smoker. It really took me and our whole family, by surprise. And it was, as you can imagine, really, really hard. And throughout that time, I was really trying to pull out all the different angles to help her. And, the diagnosis for her at stage 4, it wasn't great. And I was like, all right, how can I help her along her journey? And what can I do? And I really got into the medical mode again. And I was going with her to some appointments, and I brought her in to see an integrative medicine doctor that I thought, well, let's see if there's anything else we can be doing in addition to her traditional, her doctor for the lung cancer. What else? And I really resonated with this physician who had gone through this fellowship in integrative medicine, trained by Dr. Andrew Weil. And I ended up doing that same fellowship. And I left that appointment with my mom, and I felt hope. And I felt hope that, all right, this can be, there are things that she does have control over. And how can we, work with nutrition and work with her mindset? And just, it really, I felt a little bit lighter when I left that appointment. And so what I started to notice is that I had that inner desire to get back into working. And so I, on a whim, was like, you know what, I'll do a Google search. We'll see if anything pops up. Who knows? Maybe the universe is going to guide me in the right direction. I'll kind of throw it out there. I was leaning on faith at the time too, with everything going on with my mom. And there was an opening in an integrative psychiatry practice not far from where I lived. And I was like, well, I do think like mindset, your headspace, that impacts everything, impacts your physical health, your happiness, your well-being. And, let's see, I haven't worked in 6 years, who knows? And it ended up, I ended up getting it. So it was really one of those things that was completely unexpected, kind of fell into my lap. And so I was seeing a lot of patients in a lot of different arenas, but it really was looking at the whole person, all the different things that go into your mental health. So nutrition and gut health and exercise and mindset and relationships and the whole shebang, vitamins. And are you deficient in this? Are you deficient in that? So instead of just saying automatically, like you come in and here's the treatment for this symptom, it was looking at, why do you have this symptom in the first place, kind of a thing, right? And let's try and figure that out and see if we can kind of work on some of the root causes. And then maybe you do need a medication in the interim, but let's see what we can do here. So that was really eye-opening. And I saw a lot of different people learned crazy fast. And what I realized pretty soon was I wanted even more depth. I wanted more education. I wanted to know more. And so I then went and got my integrative medicine fellowship, which was a 2-year program, same program that I mentioned that doctor went through that saw my mom. And towards the end of that fellowship, I started to want to go a little bit of a different route. I was feeling like with the one-on-one patients, for me personally, my personality, I was feeling drained. I was feeling like it was really hard for me to set boundaries. I'd leave the office, then I'd want to go home and be mom and be with the kids. But like a lot of the things were lingering and a lot of the stressors. And, Mark, you've been in this field, so, you hear a lot of stuff. It's really, it's heavy stuff. So I found for me and for my family life and all the things that I was doing that I really enjoyed teaching a lot more. And I had been teaching a little bit locally, teaching a bit of psychiatry and a couple different things for where I went to PA school for the master's program there. And I realized I felt so different when I left teaching. I was like, I wonder if there's something here. I wonder if I can help people in a different way that is in alignment with, I guess, who I am. And a little bit healthier for me and for my health and well-being. So, I got that idea when I was at my integrative medicine fellowship. I was talking with some other doctors in the program and they were like, well, maybe, so I think someone was talking about a podcast and I was like, I never heard of podcasting. What's podcasting? And just on that, residential week where I was surrounded by some amazing people that I guess gave me the courage to really believe in myself and think outside the box, get off autopilot. I kind of came up with this idea like, maybe I can start speaking to corporations about corporate wellness. I could start this podcast. Maybe I could write a book. I just started to think maybe this is possible for me. And so that's kind of when I made the decision. And thankfully, I did this before COVID hit, which was ironic and perfect timing, because then our kids were e-learning and I was home and it all worked out. So that's long-winded, but I saw such a need for this when I was working in integrative psychiatry, and I saw a lot of different people who had very high stress jobs, from executives, and then other like some stay-at-home moms, even like all these different people who were not happy, and they were not putting themselves first, and they weren't taking care of themselves, and they were really struggling. And I saw a lot of people who were sacrificing parts of themselves for a vision of success, perhaps that wasn't going to be fulfilling, or they just were going through the motions and they weren't happy. So I felt like, there's a lot that I had to offer to try and help people, I guess, wake up a little bit and help themselves. And so, here I am now.
That is a wonderful summary. I think JJ and I could follow your journey all the way to say more about integrative psychiatry, because I'm retired and I know a little bit about it, but I'd rather hear from someone with your expertise.
Yeah. Sure. So the practice that I was in, he was traditionally a psychiatrist, and then he was trained in functional medicine. So he really embraced this functional medicine, just angle, which is really looking at like the gut health, and then looking, are there any potential infections? Like what could there be that could be spiking inflammation, that could be leading to some mental health struggles. So it was a very functional medicine angled approach. And then for me, when I went and I did my training, that was more integrative medicine, which is different than functional medicine. And for me personally, I resonate more with integrative medicine than functional medicine. Functional medicine is a lot of testing. So you're doing a lot of, for example, like vitamin deficiency tests. You're doing stool sample to check gut health. You're doing things like that. Integrative medicine is a little bit more, I'm trying to think of the right way to say it. It's looking at the whole person and looking at all these different things that go into their health. Like I said, environment, relationships and family, purpose and meaning, spiritual health, and then, diet, lifestyle, all of those things. But integrative psychiatry is, as a whole, is really looking at, okay, someone comes in with this problem. There are so many different causes, for example, of, let's just say, anxiety. And what are some culprits for this person? Maybe it has to do with their diet and they're not getting enough nutrients, or they're not getting enough protein, or whatever it may be. Maybe they're iron deficient, who knows? Or maybe it has to do with some stress in their relationships. And I think in alignment with the show, maybe they're not really facing that. And things of that nature. Maybe they benefit from some psychotherapy or therapy and counseling to help them be able to get the courage to face some of those things. But I think it's a really individualized approach where you're looking at the root cause. And then you have all these tools at your disposal, and you've got to kind of pick and choose based on the person, which ones you want to tap into to try and help them.
I love that. And it also acknowledges that mental health problems are not always just in the mind.
Yes, 100%. I think there are so many things that go into it. And what was really eye-opening for me when I would see patients, we would talk a lot about diet and what you're eating. And they'd be like, why are we having this conversation? Why are you talking to me about what I'm eating? And it's, well, what you eat in your diet impacts your mental health, and that impacts inflammation levels. Inflammation impacts mental health. And there's a lot of research behind that. So I think it's just opening people's eyes that, there are things that everyone has a certain level of control over, which if you make better choices, that can help support you wherever you're at.
Yeah. What do you reckon to that, Mark?
Well, I reckon we're getting close to a break, so I'll make it brief. You always do this, JJ. What I'd like to speak to on the other side of the break is the focus on relationships. A friend of mine is a fellow named Robert Waldinger. He has a best-selling book called The Good Life.
Oh, and yes.
It's the result of you should have him on your podcast, and I can introduce you. It's the result of the longest study at Harvard on what makes for a good life. And it's 75-year study. And he found some interesting conclusions, and maybe we'll talk about them on the other end of a word from our sponsors.
Well, I think on that note, we might just as well go into a break, Mark. We will indeed be back after this from our station sponsors.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
And you're listening to Hurt Less, Live More on UK Health Radio here with me, JJ, the Practical Alchemist, Dr. Mark Goulston, and our fabulous guest today, Kristel Bauer. And before we cut you off in your stride before the break, Mark, you wanted to talk about something.
Yeah, we were mentioning this wonderful book called The Good Life by Robert Waldinger and what was the other fellow's name? Schultz?
Yep, Dr. Mark Schultz. Mm-hmm.
Mark Schultz. And their research has shown that what makes for a good life, more than any other factor, are healthy relationships.
Yeah.
Unhealthy relationships can make for a bad life. I mean, if any of you have ever been in an unhealthy one, you know what we're talking about. And I recently wrote a blog or an article on the least used method for stress release. And the least used method for stress release is give someone an unsolicited apology and then thank them. Because what'll happen is we're all driven to have dopamine. Dopamine is pleasure. And unfortunately, the world goes to dopamine through adrenaline and excitement. But that's very mercurial. You know, when you chase after dopamine through adrenaline, after you get the adrenaline rush, you get the adrenaline crash. And corporate America loves that because they'll just sell you more stuff to excite you. But you can get to dopamine through oxytocin, and oxytocin is much more calming. There's an emotional closeness. And what I'm discovering is a lot of people love someone in their life, but they don't know how to be loving. They can love. It's easier to love and be loving towards a young child, but they often don't know how to be loving in their relationships, and it's not for a lack of wanting to. They don't know how to. So I want to share an anecdote about the unsolicited apology and then the thank you. Some years ago, I said to my wife, I owe you an apology, and it's a long-lasting one. And I also have a thank you. Which one do you want first? And she said, well, I'll go with the apology. And I'll say, I know what matters most to you is organization, focus, follow through, and maturity. And I'm terrible at all of those. And she said, yeah, about the immaturity, don't be so proud of it. And I said, I wanted to apologize because I know those are really important because your dad died when you were, a teenager and you were his favorite. And so you wanted that security. And I have been lousy on all those. Hopefully I've been consistent in being a decent dad and a decent husband. So I wanted to apologize for all the things that are very important to you. And I want to thank you for not beating me up because of that. To have those things that are most important to you, and you haven't been a happy camper sometimes, but you haven't really beaten me up given how important those are. And I just wanted to thank you for them. And by the way, I'm not sure that I'll be changing them because I'm just fundamentally not that. And it was really sweet because we can have that sort of emotional shyness. And she looked at me and she smiled. She said, thanks. But do you follow me, Chris? It just opened my heart up.
Yeah.
So I'm just sharing this with our listeners. There's something really powerful about an unsolicited apology.
That sounds really powerful. And I think part of that is you have to be vulnerable, and you're talking about relationships. And I think, relationships take effort. They take, action, and they take consistency. If you let relationships go and you don't put energy or time into them, they're likely not going to stay as strong. So I think, building stronger relationships, like what you did there, Mark, it takes vulnerability, honesty, and a lot of courage. Like what you did there, that seems like I'm sure you're a little nervous about that. It's a little bit uncomfortable, right? If you are like owning up to something where it's like there's that sensitivity and nervousness peaks, but it's worth it. So I think that that's really smart.
Something I've observed is that relationships don't end because we stop loving each other. They end because when we stop feeling liked by each other or liking each other. And there's a tip that I give everyone who will listen to me, which is once a month, have a dedicated dinner with your partner. And what you bring up is anything that gets in the way of your smiling when you see them. Because if you don't smile when you see your partner, there's a conflict. And the problem with conflicts, there's usually one person who's overbearing and the other person tries to be understanding, but the understanding person gunny sacks because they don't want it to escalate. And they're gunny sacking, they're so understanding, but it will eventually lead into resentment, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So I think it's having those conversations, and it's really important instead of not addressing them. And then those things can build and build and build and build. And then that resentment and bitterness can be there. I think open communication is critical for relationships.
It's critical, but it's so hard for people to do, right? Because we're not really trained and when I say trained, I don't mean that we have to sit in a classroom and be taught, but we are not shown that often how to be that way by the people around us. So for a lot of people, they're actually plowing a lonely furrow where they've got no role model. They've got nobody around them to show them where to go. So I think it's very hard for a lot of people to actually do that.
I agree with you. I do think sometimes, when you're looking at relationships, depending what kind of relationships you're talking about, it's important to develop a relationship with yourself. Because if you don't have a great relationship with yourself, then that can trickle into how you show up with others, how you show up in your friendships, in, your partnership, if your marriage, whatever it may be. So if you don't love yourself, if you don't like yourself that much, well, then it's going to be hard to really be, that much fun around others, or to be enjoyable, or to be, supportive, and to be a great friend. So I think a lot of times it's developing self-respect, compassion for yourself, because then that will influence how you show up towards others as well.
I think that's right. And I look back at relationships I've had over my life, and that's probably been my downfall, marriages breaking up, relationships breaking up. There's no blame on either side, but I can see how for many years when I was younger, it was very difficult for me to really open up and be that vulnerable with people, because I was always not on the defensive, but I was always keeping something inside. I couldn't let my real me out. So how can you form a relationship with somebody who's like that? It's very difficult.
I've never, I don't hate myself anymore. I flirt a little bit with being disappointed in myself. And I've always been envious of people who can love themselves with those affirmations work. But one thing that has changed it all is I have something I call the Dead Mentors Society. So I have 8 mentors. They've all died. The last one was Larry King from CNN. And before him was a big leadership guy named Warren Bennis. And whenever I'm about to be disappointed in myself, like if you have me on your podcast, Kristel, you're getting a taste of it now, I can be incredibly tangential. I can tell a story and not know where I'm going. I can say, these are the 5 points you must remember, and I can't remember 3 of them. And whenever I'm on a podcast and I feel I've blown it, I wake up Larry King from the dead. We used to go to breakfast every morning before the pandemic. And I say, Larry, wake up. And he'd say, what, Mark? What do you want? I'm not even cold yet. Why don't you go to one of your older dead mentors? And what is it? I said, I did it again, Larry. I was on a show and I was telling a story and I kind of lost the point of it. And so, yeah. And then I mentioned these things you should remember and I couldn't remember them. Mark, what'd the host think? Oh, they want me back. Mark, you woke me up for this? You know, the host wants you back? Put a sock in it already and let me just go RIP, will you? And so what happens is I cross over into oxytocin because I just feel so blessed that he was in my life. I feel myself missing him. And I've kind of given up. I'm envious of people who can say those positive statements and have them sink in. But I just wake up one of my dead mentors and they do a great job.
I love that, Mark. And I think, disappointment, all that stuff, everybody feels that. Everyone has those moments. I know for me, it's just having a right perspective. It's what I've learned to do, especially getting into the speaking and media space and interviews. When you're more public, you're more visible, then, there can be the fear of, oh, what if I'm judged? What if I'm embarrassed? Especially standing up on a stage, right? A bunch of people staring up at you. And I used to be afraid of public speaking. So I had to overcome that. And it's the perspective for me of just being proud of myself for trying and not taking myself so seriously. Because if I find myself that inner judge, that critical voice, which everybody has creep in here and there, it's like everybody makes mistakes. We're all learning. All right. Like I'm going to cut myself a break here. And then just for me, it's like just trying to shift my perspective to move forward, support myself and kind of have my back, but that hasn't always been like that. I think it's been more developing that and harnessing that. And it's like having the intention of that takes a little work, I think, for a lot of people to get that perspective if they're in the thick of it.
Yeah. And it takes courage as well, right? A lot of courage.
Can you share? I'd like to hear from each of you sharing breakthrough moments when you were able to feel that perspective and have it not be an intellectual exercise where you could actually feel it do battle with your disappointment in yourself or something. I would love to hear a story from each of you, how you did that. Maybe
I've got one that popped up. I have a lot, Mark, but I know my mindset shift around this really was around the time my mom had her diagnosis, because for me, what that did, it put things into perspective for me. Like all these little fears of, what if that person judges me? What if I look stupid? What if, at that point, I was like, and who cares? What I'm going to care more about is if I don't really live my life the way that I want to live my life or fulfill my personal mission or, really go for it. That's what I'm going to regret. If, I'm not going to regret looking stupid or feeling embarrassed, like whatever. Those are fleeting moments and fleeting emotions that will pass. So that shifted my perspective. But, I have a story to share where I released a podcast episode and, being in the radio industry, that there's some editing sometimes that will happen. So for me, I had my raw solo episode and I did some retakes and some repeats and then that got edited. So it was really nice and smooth. It sounded great. And what ended up happening is the raw episode got released and got a bunch of views and, all my slip ups and my repeats. And I realized it the next day. So it was out for a day and I was mortified. The second I saw that and I listened to it, I was like, oh my gosh, I felt like, I was so embarrassed. And then very quickly for me, I started laughing. I was like, all right, this is kind of funny because it does embrace what I talk about on my show. Like you gotta, everyone makes mistakes. And, I just was like, this is a great learning opportunity. How do I want to handle it? So I'm like, I'm going to own it. I re-released it, telling the story at the beginning of the episode, and I just really owned it. I was like, you know what? This is what happened. Everyone makes mistakes. This is a perfect example of like, well, how are you going to move forward after that happens? So embarrassing, but also a valuable lesson for me.
Yeah. It's everybody's nightmare, that happening. Everybody's nightmare.
How about JJ? I'm the clock watcher. You got a few minutes. Give us a story, JJ.
Well, we've talked about this before, Mark, how as a journalist, when I was a journalist and I used to be in television, radio, newspapers, I was never speaking with my own voice. So it's never me fully in front of the camera or behind the microphone. And so it's been a real journey for me to be me and to be authentic and to talk about the things that I want to talk about, not what the news agenda wants me to talk about, right? So it's a work in progress. I'm getting much better at it, and did a walk and talk down by the harbour here where I live, talking about the sea and the importance of it, and actually talking about a book that one of my previous guests on my other show had written about. I think it was at World Oceans Day or something like that, and I was talking about that. And I couldn't watch it back. I mean, I put it out on social media, but I couldn't really watch it because I thought it was terrible. I thought, oh, it just looked terrible. And about a week later, I went into a friend's shop here in the village, and she said, oh, I saw you on social media. You were brilliant. And I thought, oh, was I? Really? And it was that realization that, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Other people will appreciate. If you've got something to say, say it. But that has been so suppressed in not just me, but many of us. It's very difficult to get over that. But it was such a lovely affirmation and unexpected. It took me by surprise, and I was kind of quite tearful. So that's my story, Mark.
Oh, that's a great one.
Yeah. And we are coming up to a break, sort of. So maybe this is where we go and hear some more messages from our station sponsors, and we'll be back right after this.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
And you're listening to Hurt Less, Live More on UK Health Radio, the world's #1 talk health radio station. I'm JJ, the Practical Alchemist, and I am here with Dr. Mark Goulston and our very wonderful guest today, Kristel Bauer. And Mark, I think you had a story to share with us before we went to the break.
Yeah, I've been keeping a journal since 1976. I'm on volume 257, 45,000 pages. The sad thing is it's illegible. I can't read it. It literally is doctor's scrawl, but I use it to write, to express things. And the journals are sometimes, bigger than the ones you can fit in your coat pocket. And so the bigger ones I would tuck behind me in my belt, because I wouldn't want to carry them around. And so I'm giving a talk to, must have been 250 people. And I'm there in front of them, and there is my book tucked in my back. And as I'm talking to them, it starts to slip. And I'm talking, but I am contorting myself from the waist down. I mean, I look like Quasimodo. I mean, and the front row is looking at me like, what is going on? And I'm twisting, my hips, but I'm talking like this. And then at some point, it falls. And then I look at the audience and I say, yes, that is a book in my pants, but I'm glad to see you. It was the best part of the whole talk. And then at the end, I do a Q&A, and I say, I have a question for all of you. Should I keep the book bit?
Wonderful. Wonderful.
That's so funny. And I've been there too, Mark, with like a slip up in a talk. I was at a stage. I think there were probably 3,000 people in the audience, and the person who mic'd me up, it felt a little loose in my back. And I told him, he's like, "Oh, you're secure. You're good to go." And I get out there, and 2 minutes into my talk, I feel it slip down to my back. I'm wearing a dress. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, it tightens on my neck." And I'm like, shoot, I can't move. So I'm out there it was a 30-minute talk. So 27 more minutes. And I'm just like, all right, all I can control right now is giving my talk. If it falls, it falls. I've got to let it go. And then when I walk off stage, it fell through my dress, but same deal. You just kind of need to own it, and move on, focus on what you can control.
Yeah. Owning it is the key, and just being authentic with it and not trying to hide any discomfort that you might be having, right?
Yes.
Well, I'll tell you, audiences are hungry for those genuine, unscripted moments. I'm part of a company called On Global Leadership, and my co-founder partner, he was the youngest dean of a business school, got fired. He went on to be the head of leadership training for Apple in China, and coached Tim Cook, and resigned when he discovered that the Chinese government was, wanting all the data from the Chinese iPhones. And my friend Doug said, "You can't do that, Tim." And Tim said, "You got to do it if you want to do work in China." And then he also discovered, and I can say this because he's talking about it, he also discovered that he has bipolar 2. So when you're bipolar 2, you're not psychotic when you're manic. You're brilliant. You're productive. You can be productive for months and you don't need sleep. But it is, a mood. It's a bipolar disorder. And when you get to be depressed, you can be suicidal. And so what's happening is he, as a full professor at Thunderbird Business School in Arizona, a big international business school. He gives a course on China because he's one of the leading scholars, but he's giving a course on leadership. And he said, "I've just got to be honest. I'm going to tell my story, everything about it, being fired, bipolar 2, suicidal. And I'm a psychiatrist. I'm not his psychiatrist." I said, "If you go down that road, you can't turn back. Fortune 500 CEOs are not going to hire you." And he said, a Fortune 500 CEO is not as important as sharing this. And he's become the Pied Piper. I mean, students who are MBAs come up to him and hug him. And they say, "You're the most honest person in business we've ever heard from." So he's going down that road. And I'm just sharing, I think there's a real hunger for gaffes, spontaneity, and I guess how we recover from them, and not getting overly neurotic about it, but just sharing in the awkwardness with our audiences, and audiences love that. What do you think? What do you think, Kristel?
I think that honesty is being embraced so much more. And there used to be this version of professionalism that was very dry. You don't share things, and you look a certain way, you wear certain things, you talk a certain way, you don't talk about certain things. And the past few years, that's changed. And now people are really wanting the whole person to show up, not just this like kind of fake version. And so one thing that I've talked about too is like, are you a different person at work than you are in the rest of your life? Like, do you bring who you are to work, or is there like work version, then home version? And I think now it's, people are looking for more of that just authentic you to show up at work too.
Yes, I think that's right. And it's something that I talk about a lot as well. The real need for authenticity now. Nobody really cares. It's something though that as somebody who was trained in the media, the old-fashioned media as it is now, that's something that I still sometimes struggle to kick into touch, because you were trained, if you were reading the news, you had to read it in a certain way with a certain amount of credibility. There was no room for gaffes, right? So this is a very different world. And sometimes I kind of have to kick myself and say, get over it. Just go for it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you something, JJ, because one of my friends is a fellow named Marshall Goldsmith. He's a pretty well-known executive coach. And we were having a discussion in our 100 coaches community. And he was talking about authenticity doesn't mean disclosure. Mm-hmm. He said, so for instance, there's people like Ken Blanchard. There's a fellow named Alan Mulally who managed Ford through the crisis of 2008. And here's the question. I think, rightly or wrongly, and I don't want to go much into this, that Princess Diana was appreciated for her authenticity. And, and then when she had the disclosure of that of that book, it was met with all kinds of reactions. And I'm not here to defend it or criticize it, but I think there's something said to be being authentic and accessible, and people can have a sense that you care about them and they can emotionally connect with you. But Marshall made the point, that it's not the same thing as too much disclosure. So what do either of you think about that?
Well, I absolutely agree that it's not about disclosure, and the whole of the UK might forgive me if I just mention a certain prince who has disclosed probably rather too much, more than we ever wanted to know about their life. So there is that, people want authenticity. They want to see the real person, but they don't want to know everything about you. They don't want to know all the details in the background of who you are unless they specifically ask. There is an oversharing element, isn't there? That we don't want to go near. Yeah. So I agree completely.
Yeah. What do you think, Kristel?
I think that there's pressure on people, and sometimes that can lead to oversharing. Social media, I think, feeds into that, like a pressure to overshare. And I don't think everything needs to be shared. There are some things I do believe should stay personal or should stay within your close family, close friends. And so I do think that in certain situations, those boundaries are pushed a little too far, but ultimately I also believe that it's up to each individual. So if someone really embraces that and they're comfortable with that, that's what they want to do, great, go for it. But I think that should not then pressure other people to feel like they have to do the same thing. I think it's really tuning into yourself, not giving into, I guess you call it that peer pressure, to overshare. You don't need to overshare, share what you're comfortable with, but recognize that it is important that you show up as you and not, don't feel the need to hide who you are. But at that same time, don't fall into the pressure to overshare either. It's tricky these days. I think it's a really tricky thing to navigate, especially as I said, with social media, where oversharing is a very real thing.
Yeah. But I think understanding the difference between revealing an awful lot about yourself and being authentic, the two are very different. Yeah. So it's understanding that boundary. I can be authentic as you like. I hope that I'm being authentic on these shows, but I don't reveal everything about me. There are certain things that I want to keep to myself.
What do you think about the media? There was a saying, if it bleeds, it leads. And, not too far behind it is if it cries, that ain't bad either. And, you'll see journalists asking that question. Well, so at that moment when you discovered that, that betrayal, that whatever. So what was that like? And you'll see that they are pushing whoever they're interviewing to be revealing and disclosing about something that, they prefer not to.
Yeah. And it's true that the balance of news isn't at all balanced. Let's just say news is all about, the shock value, the catastrophes, because these are the things that are really sticky. These are the things that people automatically want to hear a bit more about. I tried to push good news for a while when I had a little independent production company, but nobody really wanted to know, because good news doesn't sell. It's the the bad news. It's the multiple pile up crashes on the, motorway or the freeway. It's the deaths, the shocking things. It's I guess, the stars who are being unfaithful to, that kind of thing. People it seems, want to read that, and they don't want to read the good news. So journalists are trained to say, how did that feel? So that people can, overshare, so that it's voyeurism, really, in another form. But it seems to be what sells in the media. I'm not so sure whether that's the same now as it was in my day, because I'm pretty old now.
I think Kristel was. Let's bring this back to Kristel. I mean, she's our guest. We're not
ignoring you, Kristel. We're really
this
not.
Is great. We have a great time.
I was thinking of live greatly, and in my mind from this conversation, I was just playing around. Live greatly or live authentically, and they're different. And what would I lean towards? I can see live greatly is much more marketable, because I think
greatly. That came to me when I was meditating. The live greatly. Like I was really I want to come up with something. I want to help people live life to whatever it is for them to live life to their fullest. And that's going to look differently for each person. So I was trying to think of how can I embrace that, where I saw so many people who are just going through the motions, day in, day out, and they weren't looking like they were really enjoying their lives. They weren't acting like they were really enjoying their lives. They were kind of on autopilot. And I wanted to, I guess, like I said in the beginning of our conversation, help people wake up a little bit. You don't have to keep doing the same thing day in, day out, responding the same way day in, day out. You can choose again. You can choose a new path. You can get off autopilot. So for me, that live greatly embraces that of living up to your potential, whatever that is. But that does mean authentic too, because each person is going to have, in my mind, their own personal mission. I think everyone's here for a reason. Everyone's here to do something that is in alignment with them. And it's up to each one of us, I feel to really figure out what that is and then, move in that direction.
I so agree with you there, Kristel. I really do. It's all about finding out who you are underneath all these other things and these hurts and the conditioning that life places on top of you and almost suffocates you sometimes, which is what I think happens to a lot of people. But, we're coming to the end of the show now. And what we really want to hear from you is where people can find out more about you and where they can get in touch with you.
Well, thank you so much. This has been amazing. People can visit my website. It's livegreatly.co. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, and I have my podcast, Live Greatly. So would love to hear from your listeners. And thank you so much for hosting me. This has been wonderful.
Oh, no, you're very welcome. And yes, we should all get on each other's podcasts. Mark, what do you reckon?
I mentioned force of nature, force of nurture. I think you're also a hybrid between motivational and inspirational.
Yes, nice.
And that's a lovely hybrid.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you, JJ.
I would really urge everybody to go and check out Kristel's website and see what else she has to say. And check out your TED Talk as well. What was the name of your TED Talk again?
So my TED Talk was redefining work-life balance in a COVID-19 world. So that was just trying to help people figure out that new normal now that we've gone into a lot of hybrid work. And so that is available on TED's website and then YouTube as well.
Kristel, thank you so much for joining us. Mark, great to be with you again. We've come to the end of this show. Thank you to everybody listening, and we hope that you will join us again for more chat, more inspiration, hopefully, with me and Mark on Hurt Less, Live More. But from me, Mark, and Kristel today, goodbye for now.